Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you how to change an oil pressure sensor. This is a pretty simple job that you can do yourself in just a few minutes. I'll walk you through the whole process, from start to finish. So, if you're looking to save some money and do it yourself, keep watching. The first step is to perform a preliminary inspection of the oil pressure sensor and its surrounding area. Look for any visible signs of damage, such as leaks, cracks, or loose connections. If you find any damage, the sensor will need to be replaced. If the preliminary inspection doesn't reveal any obvious problems, the next step is to check the engine oil pressure using a mechanical dipstick. This will give you a baseline reading of the oil pressure. To check the oil pressure, start by warming up the engine to operating temperature. Then, shut off the engine and wait a few minutes for the oil to settle. Next, locate the oil dipstick and remove it. Wipe the dipstick clean with a rag, then reinsert it into the engine and remove it again. The oil level on the dipstick should be between the add and full marks. If the oil level is low, add oil until it reaches the full mark. If the oil level is high, remove some oil until it reaches the add mark. Once the oil level is correct, start the engine and let it idle for a few minutes. Then, check the oil pressure gauge. The oil pressure should be within the normal range specified by the manufacturer. If the oil pressure is low, there could be a problem with the oil pump, the oil pressure sensor, or the oil filter. If the oil pressure is high, there could be a problem with the oil pressure relief valve. If you suspect that there is a problem with the oil pressure sensor, you can test it using a multimeter. To do this, disconnect the electrical connector from the oil pressure sensor. Then, connect the positive lead of the multimeter to the sensor's signal wire and the negative lead of the multimeter to the sensor's ground wire. Start the engine and let it idle for a few minutes. The multimeter should read the oil pressure in volts. If the multimeter reading is within the normal range specified by the manufacturer, the oil pressure sensor is working properly. If the multimeter reading is outside of the normal range, the oil pressure sensor needs to be replaced. A new oil pressure sensor, a socket wrench, a torque wrench, a rag, a container for used oil. Locate the oil pressure sensor. It is usually located on the engine block, near the oil filter. Disconnect the electrical connector from the oil pressure sensor. Use the socket wrench to loosen the oil pressure sensor. Remove the old oil pressure sensor and discard it. Apply a small amount of oil to the threads of the new oil pressure sensor. Install the new oil pressure sensor and tighten it using the torque wrench. The torque specification for the oil pressure sensor can be found in your vehicle's owner's manual. Connect the electrical connector to the new oil pressure sensor. Start the engine and check for leaks. Make sure that the new oil pressure sensor is properly installed and tightened. Start the engine and check for leaks. If there are no leaks, you have successfully replaced the oil pressure sensor. It is a good idea to replace the oil pressure sensor gasket at the same time you replace the sensor. If you are not comfortable replacing the oil pressure sensor yourself, you can take your vehicle to a mechanic to have it done. Replacing an oil pressure sensor is a relatively simple task that can be done in a few minutes. By following these instructions, you can save yourself the cost of having a mechanic do it for you.